Jai Guru, everyone.
Jai Guru.
Jai Guru, everybody. Welcome to our next episode of our podcast about the autobiography of a yogi. We're going through it line by line. We have reached the second part of chapter 1 today. We're going to talk about Guruji is actually being born, where he's being born, about his parents a little bit, and about the tendencies that his mother and his father had. For example, the charity, how they spend money, and how they interact with each other. And of course, we have our usual crowd. Hello, Priya and Chris and Lauren. How are you guys today?
Good, thank you.
Very well. Good.
Excellent. Every time I look at Chris's backgrounds, they're always fascinating me. That's like from the Brazilian rainforest. I think I'm jealous. Yeah. Who am I kidding?
But it's invite is open to anyone.
Yes. Oh yeah. I'm coming, mate.
I was just telling my wife, I think we should come make it a 2-weeker this year.
A yoga retreat session in Brazil.
Ooh, yeah.
I'm down. Yeah. I think not many people will refuse an offer like that, Chris. You gotta be careful.
Yeah.
All right. So let's start with the first paragraph, where it basically says, we all know when Guruji was born on January 5th, 1893, in the small town of Gorakhpur. I hope I said that correctly. It's near the Himalayas. And Guruji, he was one of 8 children. It was like 4 boys and 4 girls. His name when he was born was Mukunda Lal Ghosh. And he was the second son. So the way I understand it, he had an older sister and an older brother, and all the others were younger than him. And
so that's why he's Mejda. So that's why he was Mejda. Mejda means the third.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. See, that's why we have Priyank on, because he knows things.
No, I didn't know that. That's a bit different language, actually. I think that's what it means, yeah. Third eldest.
Very interesting. Hence the title of the book, Mejda, right?
Yeah.
That's very famous, written by his brother, Sananda.
Yes.
Very cool. And one thing that I found interesting, there's a lot of interesting details in there, that Gorakhpur is near the Himalayas. And I feel like oftentimes you have those saints, they incarnate, they're born somewhere near the Himalayas, and then they just, as a young lad, go in the mountains and start meditating in a cave, and that's it. Don't see them anymore. I wonder if that was part of why he was born in Gorakhpur. And he also had the memories of having lived in the Himalayan caves in a previous incarnation. Priyank?
Yep, interesting point, Matt, because Gorakhpur was named after that because of the saint Gorakhnath. And Gorakhnath is this order of Shiva worshippers and traditions that goes down to this day. So this saint was around in like the 11th century, like after Shankaracharya, and he was pretty important in organizing that tradition, which as we say, it goes on. And there's a beautiful story about Gorakhnath. He's like a devotee that was the incarnation of God, as it were, and he followed a similar trajectory to Mukunda, actually, because like his birth was presaged, and his mum was like warned, your mum, your child is going to be an ascetic. And then like 2 weeks after this man said it, the boy left and then became this wonderful saint after finding God. So yeah, it's a nice story.
Amazing. Yeah, with avatars, that is kind of something that happens often, that their birth is foreseen, right? Like we've seen that same thing with Krishna, and we've seen the same with Jesus, and I'm sure there's many other saints whose birth has been foreseen. In some cases, it has then been tried to be prevented, right? Like in the case of Krishna or Jesus, for example, right? Which is usually futile, because when the divine will wants something, it will happen. Priyank, I saw you put a tag there about Guruji's birth. Do you want to go through that a little bit?
Yeah, I'll do that. But Lauren, you had a point. You want to just quickly make it?
Oh, it was just a curious thought I had. It's kind of strange. It just hit me that he was born near the Himalayan mountains, and he had that like inner urge to always go, didn't he? Like even when things were difficult, he'd say, "Oh, I want to go to the Himalayan mountains." And I wonder, it was always that thing that was like out of reach and that was denied, wasn't it? And I wonder if that's potentially because in this lifetime, maybe he needed to cut that karmic attachment of, you know, not being so tied to having to be in that place that he could take God anywhere he went. I don't know. It's just amusing, but yeah, it's hit me. Chris?
Sparks a memory, actually. When I was about 5 years old, I packed my little suitcase and walked up the top of my long drive. And I was looking around and realized I lived in the countryside and I had no idea where I was going to go. But maybe I was looking for the Himalayas and I just didn't know it.
Maybe.
And then I sulked about for a while at the top of the drive, and then realized I had to do the walk of shame back to my mum, where she was laughing hysterically with my sister. But yeah, no Himalayan mountains near Northern Irish countryside, that's for sure.
No.
Lauren, I have to squash your theory, I'm afraid.
That's okay. Squash it with truth. I only care about the truth. I don't care about, you know, anything else.
I think if that desire was within mere mortals such as us, then I think you'd be on the money. But Guruji is an incarnation, an avatar, a Brahma avatar, as we call him. So he was born and realized, and we know that from some of his talks. And so for a being such as Yogananda, he's already set, so he has no karma bag.
Okay.
So those desires don't think he'd have those latent desires, such latent desires. But he could have formed them in this birth, because you kind of go back into this.
That's what I'm wondering.
You go back into the bag when you're reborn. Yeah, Chris?
Back into the bag.
Chris?
Yeah, he talked about seeing himself in a previous lifetime early on. So that seed, let's say, would have been, as you said, Frank, maybe planted. That seed of desire may have been planted then, coming into this nature of being human, and he was maybe yearning to go back there simply because he envisaged himself, he saw himself there in previous life. So yeah, maybe this is what we talked about. The lack of visions are probably beneficial to a lot of us, because maybe they would stir desires and things that maybe we could move on from more easily without them, possibly. But as Priyank said, an avatar it's kind of hard to judge what exactly was there for our own benefit and therefore or in reality.
Mike?
And he had the urge to find a guru who could reveal God to him early in life, right? And his go-to point was always the Himalayas. He was always thinking he would find his guru there, because that's probably how it happened in his previous incarnations, and that's kind of the memories he had. Yeah.
Yes.
Do you want to start with this, Priyank?
Yeah, sure. So those actually, also I deleted a card actually about this topic, which was resurrection versus reincarnation. So a master such as Yogananda, when they take birth, I think this is defined in Mejda, when they would take birth, or Sri Yukteswar, when they take birth into this plane, they're resurrected, the forms of divinity, whereas we would be reincarnated as a different, different in a different body. But if you were resurrected, then you come with divine sight and with purpose and consciously coming back, and hence it's a resurrection. But yeah, semantics. But it could be an interesting one for us to use, perhaps, reincarnation for people that aren't realized, and resurrected for people that are coming back in a, you know, from one who is been released from the material, the astral and the causal bodies. But anyway, we digress quite a lot. Mejda's birth. So we said Mejda. So Mejda is what the younger children would call him. Was apparently during his birth, his mother was having severe labor pains, and she cried out for Lahiri Mahashaya. And during that time, she said suddenly a celestial light filled the room, and from the concentrated rays in the center emerged the form of Lahiri Mahashaya, and then her pain vanished instantly. And apparently the divine light continued to illumine the room until the little Mukunda was born and drew his first breath. And that recountal is in Mejda. And so his siblings called him Mukun or Mukko, which is like you have cool names that you kind of like pick up. I think that's probably in English as well, that you get little nicknames, but similar to the actual first name. And then you in Phil Goldberg's book about this, he says that Guruji was born at 8:38 p.m. And the reason he's recorded this and researched this is because the time of birth and the date of birth is all very, very significant in terms of just what birth has just happened, kind of like is like presaged by these. I don't know if I'm making much sense, but astrologically it's very significant, the time and the date of the birth. Like, for example, when I've got an astrological chart for when I was born, and they map out the planets and they show what
how many marriages
exactly how many marriages. Yep. They predict, based on which planets are where, what the biggest influence will be in this person's life. So in mine, it kind of predicted the kind of career that I'd go down and my personality. And interestingly, it also predicted that my birth would be difficult for my father. And within a year of my birth, my father passed away. Yeah, pretty deep, huh? So it's pretty. It can be, and I don't think they put that in just to like scare people. But if you're ready, if you're prepared, if you're willing to get, or if you actually actively get a horoscope done, which is done properly, then you should be ready to hear what's on the chart, even if it is difficult reading, because you might have some influence, and you can prepare yourself, perhaps. Yeah, Chris.
Yeah, from what I understand about these, this reading is that you essentially are still, through sheer power of will, able to influence certain outcomes. If it dictates one thing, you might be able to influence it. Maybe it depends exactly what it might be dictating, but essentially we're greater than what we're predestined to be at times. But I suppose with the likes of Yogananda, even now that we're kind of musing about this a little bit, Sri Yukteswar said to Yogananda, like, if I stray, put my head on your lap and guide me back to God. So, these beings who are supremely ordained don't take anything for granted, right? There's always work to be done. And through willpower or lack of application of that, then you can drift into anything. Always good lessons, which I think is sort of the point here, why they're sharing so much with us.
Yeah, Mike.
It's very inspiring how Guruji takes his horoscope and says, yeah, that's written there, but that doesn't mean I actually have to follow it. I can do what I want. And he's an avatar, so for him, this is probably child's play. I wonder how hard this is actually for like a normal, like someone who hasn't reached that state yet. But there's definitely always those tendencies there. I'm not even sure if it's good to know your horoscope or not, because it might actually make you do certain things that you otherwise wouldn't.
Yeah, certainly. But it's about overcome. Just because the pull is there in a certain direction doesn't mean that you don't have the strength to overcome that pull. Yeah, what, Chris?
We don't want to labor too hard on this point because we're not, we're not, you know, we do want to get into lots more material in this chapter. But wearing things like bangles or certain metals on the skin, as Prank is showing on YouTube for any viewers there, I believe that can sort of protect from some negative happenings and going ons that might be related to your time and place of birth. And meditation, I guess this is the big one, right? That through meditation, you're going to break the bonds of whatever kind of karmic bonds you might have at the time of birth and so on that it might be linked to. So I think that's the ultimate takeaway here, that Yogananda does say, take control of your own destiny through meditation.
Absolutely.
Horoscopes can also be wrong as well, because obviously depends on who got it and how they read things, but it can obviously be incorrect. Like, for example, Yogananda's, like, they named him Mukunda because his birth said that Mu should be the consonant Ma, and then the U sound should be what his name is based on. And for me, it was Ba, so I had a P and I think another letter. But yeah, his horoscope, apparently, Phil Goldberg found, that said that he'd have 3 marriages and the first 2 of his wives would die young.
He obviously got the time wrong.
Yeah, but apparently, because Yogananda was so hard-willed, as Chris said, that we can overcome, he burnt the horoscope as a boy in defiance.
I think I'd do that too.
Mike?
Yeah, he mentions that later on as well, right? Before he joins the Swami order, he mentions in the autobiography his horoscope of the 3 marriages, and he says that actually they did try to betrothal him twice or 3 times even, and he refused each time. So there was definitely some truth to that horoscope. So, but you're right as well that horoscopes, it really depends on who does them, and there's a lot of horoscopes out there that are probably not as good quality as some others. Let's put it that way.
Apparently, modern astrologers, when they read his stars as they were, they go back in time and they said, "Oh yeah, his path was written, in the stars." But obviously, hindsight brigade is on fire usually with those kind of readings.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, that's what a good astrologer does. He would say, "I've seen it all along." Absolutely. We also want to cover all the footnotes in the autobiography, and there is one here that you will notice that he's referred to here as Mukunda Lal Ghosh, and the author's name is Paramahansa Yogananda, and he explains it here that when he later joins the Swami order, that the name of Yogananda will be bestowed onto him, and then when he comes back to India in 1935, the title Paramahansa is bestowed onto him by Swami Sri Yukteswar. So we want to cover that as well. And with that being said, we can move to the next paragraph. The next paragraph talks about his parents, that he was born into a Bengali family. Bengal is a state in the east of India, bordering today's country of Bangladesh. The biggest city there is Kolkata, if you're interested, and it also has some significance later in Guruji's life, because he will go to school there and other things. his parents are of the caste Kshatriya, which is the politicians and warrior caste, and we can talk about that a little bit. His mother is like a very strong, like it's like the person that he gets all of his like he projects all his love onto his mother, especially in his youth. And later on, he says the only thing when she passes away, the only thing that could replace my mother was the love of Divine Mother, right? So that was a very important person in his life. Obviously, it's his mother, but also he keeps saying that the dark eyes of his mother and the love that he felt from her. And he also says that they had a family life that was very harmonious, and basically he had ideal parents, which is nice, and he will go in more detail in the next few paragraphs. We can talk about a little bit about what it means to be Kshatriya. I saw a small paragraph about this in the Divine Romance, and I just want to read it out quickly. And it says, the Kshatriya, having through many lives fulfilled the desires of the Sudra and the Vaisya states, which are the two castes that are lower, begins to seek the meaning of life. He tries to overcome his bad habits, to control his senses, and to do what is right. Kshatriya, by occupation, are noble rulers, statesmen, and warriors. And of course, the caste system nowadays isn't used as it was in the higher ages, and it's not perfect. And we can debate what the significance is of his parents being of the Kshatriya caste. Priyank, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, just quickly. So the common view nowadays is that caste distinctions are hereditary. So, for example, personally, I was born in a Vaishya caste, so I belong to that. But no, that's not true. Each of these, the four principal castes, are qualities that we manifest. So perhaps when we're experiencing higher states of meditation, we're experiencing the Brahmin qualities, and perhaps if we're in the states of the doldrums of depression or anxiety, we're displaying the Shudra qualities. So yeah, this is very beautifully explained in God Talks with Arjuna for anyone that wants to delve deeper.
Yeah, and I suppose in the higher ages, you would have a sage at birth tell you what kind of caste you're into, and it wouldn't be hereditary, I'm guessing. You would probably be able to have children who are of different castes. That's kind of how I imagine it. But don't take my word for it. I wasn't there, but that's kind of how I would imagine this caste system to work in the higher ages. Yeah, Chris?
Yeah, coming from someone who hadn't actually heard much about this before I was introduced to this book and the Eastern philosophies in the last, say, 5 years or so, we're taught that everybody's equal in Western world, and of course that is true from a, say, value of the soul, soul sense. But we all have very much we come from very different backgrounds. We have different skills and different aspects to us that we might perceive as valuable in one sense and not in another. It for the first impression is like, oh, this is some kind of ancient tradition that's to be thrown out, and it's to be burnt down because it's inequality essentially. So I suppose the idea behind it, maybe Priyank, you could kind of talk about it a little bit, or if we want to move on from this subject, is that this is simply the evolution of the soul. A question to my mind is like, how can this really be determined or relied upon in the modern age? Can you simply choose what caste system you think you belong to through your own actions after a time, or is it tardy or to be thrown out?
So there's a confusion between professions and family that you're born into, and the spiritual significance of the caste. And I've already mentioned the spiritual significance of caste, i.e. the qualities that we're manifesting, what we're most associating ourselves with. But the confusion is because of families that are born into certain traditions where those qualities are quite, manifest a lot. For example, a yogi that's practicing meditation may exhibit a saintly character, and he may be born a Brahmin, and then his children will be Brahmins as well. But that doesn't mean that the children have taken on the qualities of his yogi father.
Yeah, it's quite a beautiful, complex system, one that I can profess to understand at all, but focus on the Kriya for now. I
Yes,
think.
yes.
Makes sense. Another question that came up here about this paragraph was, what would be an ideal marriage and ideal parental settings according to Guruji's teachings? And he does talk about this quite a lot in the lessons. We're not going to quote the lessons here in this podcast, but there is definitely, I feel like the way he was brought up carries a lot of the same kind of messages that you would see. So, I mean, it also happened very long ago. It was like he was born in 1893. So the roles between husband and wife were clearer defined than they are today. So you had like the husband being out working, and then the wife being more at home, being a householder. And that kind of is something that you wouldn't see anymore today. Today, you would probably have both parents working, but there are definitely some messages for parents. We will see in the next paragraph as well how like his mother likes to take stories from the Ramayana and turn it into lessons for the children. All right, so with that being said, let's move on to the next paragraph. The next paragraph is talking a lot about his father. His father is like an interesting personality. So like we mentioned earlier, he is the person who he works at a big company. He works at a big railroad company, and he's I would say the authoritarian in the family. So he is disciplining the kids, but he's also he's loving, but in a more stern manner, I would say. And his talents himself, he's a very spiritually ordained person, and he's very intellectual. So he cares a lot about math, and I don't know why, but somehow when I think of him, I think of my own father, who has like a PhD in physics and in math, and I can totally relate to having a father like that. And then his mother was a bit the opposite. His mother was a very loving, endearing person who was very tender, and she often just won the kids over just by the way she projected her love onto them. So in that sense, they were opposites, but they complemented each other really well, both of them, which is something that is very interesting, because sometimes you would think, do two partners, maybe do they need to be very similar? But they don't seem to be similar at all, but they kind of complemented each other. Priyank?
Yes, it kind of brings home gives some context to what is a perfect family environment, like what qualities of mother and father really help nurture children the best. because here we've pretty much got an ideal example, right? His mother was Queen of Hearts and his father was the disciplinarian, the logician. My wife personally, when we were deciding whether or not to have children, she was like, "Oh, I'll quit my job, and obviously I'll be at home all the time." And I said, "Why would you do that?" Because she earns more than I earn, because so financially it wouldn't make sense. But she's like, "No, if I'm going to be a mother, I'm going to be a full-time mother. I'm not going to be." So she was going along the same sort of lines as Yogananda's mother, which is interesting because she's very, very traditional in that. And I think traditionally that's pretty much how most cultures do things, isn't it? Chris?
Yeah, I don't think there is such a thing as an ideal parenthood, and I would put that to the group, because wasn't it the Buddha that said when he became enlightened that everything was in perfect order? He kind of looked around him, he'd seen so much pain and suffering, and sort of asked this question why, but he saw that the souls were in the place that they needed to be at that time, and this suffering was maybe this dream world's suffering. And so with maybe parents, if they're hard on you, if they're not, if they're there, if they're not, depending on the circumstances, maybe that is just one aspect of many that you need in this life to propel yourself into the next stage of your development. Are we not saying that all is in perfect order in this mad chaos? Sometimes we can't see the wood through the trees, but the reality might be simply that there is no such thing as ideal or perfect. It is just how it is for each individual.
Absolutely. One thing that I like that Guruji talks about also in the lessons is like the role of discipline in raising a child, because I feel like these days this is something a value that people don't really push, because they want to let the child be more someone who realizes themselves, who kind of you want to get the most out of the child and have individualism out of the child. And there is still a role for some form of disciplining, even though it probably definitely changed from 100 years ago, I would say. Yeah, Lauren?
Yeah, I feel like it depends from which place it comes. So it seems that Yogananda's parents they came from a very pure place, even with his father being that disciplinarian and being quite intellectual and straight-laced. It came from that purity of heart, and the same with his mother. So I think, yeah, when we're raising children or even interacting with it, I think we always have to ask, is this coming from a pure place of love? And if not, perhaps don't. Because children are sponges, and they will just absorb everything. So yeah, we must be as gentle with children as we can, and with other people as well.
Are you a bit of a sponge as well, Lauren? That way you're always hanging out at the London Centre.
Yeah, just looking it all in.
Okay, well up.
I agree. One of the reasons why I said that is because one of my good friends is a teacher, and I wouldn't call him disciplinarian, but he definitely has authority. And he's loved by the children more than all the other teachers, just because he has this kind of credibility for them, that when he says something, they would not disrespect him, because they kind of feel like there is a presence in the room. And I guess that's something that you need as a parent, and something that needs to be learned. And yeah, let's leave it at that. Chris?
Yeah, I was just maybe going to comment there. It's probably it's the hardest, and I wouldn't say the most undervalued, but it's an undervalued role in some ways in society, for sure, because we have these jobs that, as Priyank said, the mother and father both have a job, so does somebody give it up, or does the child then go to a school and does somebody else raise the child? It's not necessarily been the way through history. So it's quite a modern phenomena, this idea that the child's almost raised by other people as they grow up, because both parents need to work because of the way the economy is today. So it's a magical opportunity to culture a soul, not to raise them, to kind of allow them to flourish, isn't it? So yeah, very, very undervalued in some senses, and the teachers basically are raising kids in many ways. They're notoriously undervalued members of our society as well. But loose comments not related to Yogananda, so we can refocus.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. We found a bit of a biography of Guruji's father, Bhagabati, and let's just go through the first two paragraphs. Priyank, do you want to read the first one?
Yeah. So Bhagabati was the eldest son of Ishan Chandra Ghosh, a school teacher in the village of Ichhapur, Bengal, who died of smallpox, leaving his son to care for his widowed mother and younger siblings. He managed to get a full tuition scholarship at the Hooghly Collegiate School and taught himself English by studying the pages of an English newspaper and committing to memory an entire English dictionary. He obtained a perfect score in maths and passed his college entrance exams, but could not raise the necessary funds to continue his education.
Lauren, do you want to continue?
Yeah. He moved to Calcutta in 1871. After getting by doing some tutoring, he finally got a job with the Public Works Department of the Indian government as an assistant accountant and was posted to East Central Bihar. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yep.
On 31st of December, 1873. He married Gyana in Calcutta and returned to Rangoon. Burma was a province of India then, where he had taken a posting on the 16th of April, 1875, to get more money to send his brother Sarada to law college. Do you want me to carry on?
Yeah.
So their first son, Ananta, was born there. And while Bhagabati passed his accounting examination, which led him being transferred to the PWD office of the Government Examiner of Railway Accounts in Saharanpur. Is that you?
Pretty good.
Gosh, I'm gonna have to take a course on this. Where am I? Where his posting began on the 7th of April, 1885. His two eldest daughters were born in Muzaffar. Mike, why did you make me read this?
Muzaffarpur, Bihar.
Yep, Bihar, after another transfer on the 10th of October, 1886. 4 years later, he was transferred to Gorakhpur from 16th of October, 1890, rising through the ranks.
Thank you, Lauren. I apologize.
I apologize to all of the listeners that just heard me butcher a beautiful language.
I think I would have a hard time too, Muzaffarpur. Good thing we have Priyank here, who knows how to pronounce Indian words.
The Indian listeners will be like, no, he doesn't. He's British Indian. Yeah, the pronunciations all off.
Well, could have fooled me. But what we see here is a person who very early on had to take on responsibility, right? And he basically had to carry his own family. Chris, do you want to go make a comment?
I was just going to say that, Mike. There was somebody who had tragedy very early on in his life, similar to Mukunda, but he took up the role and responsibilities of taking his own development, but also the family, his younger siblings. So something that I think you could be an armchair psychologist here and just say that may then translate into the person that he later became. And he had a bit more of a stern approach and dedicated and focused and all these things he may then have learned from when he was younger. And his father was a school teacher, and maybe depending on the father, maybe he would have been a disciplinarian himself, and that may have been more of the style, say back in the day, as we mentioned as well, and that may have had something to do with his shaping and molding of who he became.
For sure. Priyank?
Yeah, I really like that. Like Chris, your particular brand of armchair psychiatry. I'd certainly go in for such a session.
Subscribe to it anytime.
In case you want to start a new vocation.
Like a side hustle for Chris.
new podcast.
I don't know what the regulation there is like in Brazil, but let's make it happen.
Yeah. Disclaimer is, do not take anything said here as forbidden. Yeah.
But no, on a serious note, the difficulties that he had, like the saying, like some people are born great, some have greatness thrust upon them. I think the third part, isn't there? But he was forced into this role of where he had to like make himself competent in terms of managing his family, being the breadwinner, and just sorting his own discipline out. So I can totally relate to that. If it was up to me, I was forced into doing various things in my life as well. But if it was up to me, I'd be hitchhiking in Costa Rica right now. I don't think I'd be doing engineering in London. Mike.
One thing that stuck out for me was also that he didn't just care about himself, but also about his siblings. So you could have said, for example, I hear sometimes those stories where you go like, okay, it was very difficult for us, but I made it, right? You kind of got into a good school, and then you kind of have the profession that you wanted. But he, like in one of the paragraphs, he also had enough money to put his brother into law school, right? So this is something that I find remarkable, and it might be due to Indian customs or what kind of is expected of you as an oldest brother there. Priya?
Yeah. And these stories of him raising his his brother and providing for his mother and all that are not uncommon at all. I remember I come from quite a poor family back in India, and we were when my father and my uncles were studying. I remember when my uncle, he used to tell me that so that they didn't have any electricity in their house and they couldn't afford to do the things. So with his school books, they'd go to a public street where there's a lamp and just study under the street lamp, which is and again, that's not uncommon. It's just a thing that they did, and then he really excelled. He did it really superbly in his profession, and was able to support us as the eldest brother in his family, or my eldest uncle.
He certainly was really successful in what he did, even though it seems he relocated 7 times, from what I can tell in his short biography that we have here, quite frequently as well. Every couple of years, it seems he was being relocated by the railroad, until eventually, he retired from the Bengal Nagpur Railway in 1920, and he passed away 1942. So he enjoyed a bit of a retirement, but he did work incredibly hard and very committed, very, very service orientated. That would have been a great, Yogananda talks about loyalty, doesn't he? And this is one of the highest values that we could have, loyalty. And here was a man who was amazingly loyal to being of service to the public. Having relocated 7 times, it's quite a disruption to your life in many ways. But he stuck loyal. He didn't chase money, although I'm sure somebody as competent as him could have. And that would have been a great role model for Yogananda to have in his life. Mike?
And I totally agree. And especially back in those days, I'm guessing moving back then was even more difficult. And then having all these young children, right? You have to move and you have like a toddler and then 2 other kids, and they probably have to go to different schools because you move to a different city, and like I can today this is always such a drama. Even though here in America this is interesting, I read like the average American moves 11 times in their lives or something, which is insane. And then I saw the value for Germany was half that, like 5 times or something. So maybe this also, I'm not sure how it is in India. Maybe the average Indian is more like the average American in that respect, that they move a lot.
Yeah, it depends on the like the profession. Like my uncle, I remember he moved so many times as well, but all within the state though, my eldest uncle. So he used to work for General Electric, like the power supply company. So yeah, he's every 3 years he'd have this, and the company would provide everything, like the home and everything. So we used to go live in different houses and stuff. It was pretty cool.
Nice. Yeah, but the company provides, that makes it a bit easier.
Yeah.
All right. So with that being said, we can move to the next paragraph, which is talking about the way mother was disciplining the children. And he uses an interesting word here, bittersweet. So they kind of, the children made, they learned about the scriptures in a bittersweet way because she was using the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. She chose stories from there carefully to basically discipline the children, to tell them lessons they need to learn. And this is very interesting because this is not at all how I was brought up. I feel like this would be similar if my mom would have gone through the Bible to find stories and chastise me like that, right? Which would be weird. It would be strange, and I don't know anyone who was brought up like this. Yeah, Priyank?
Yeah, so and they wouldn't, interestingly, they wouldn't have read the books. These are stories that are just generally passed down through through parent and child and grandmother. All these lovely stories. And there's in village life in India, there's this beautiful setting where there's usually a big tree and there's usually like a very nice clear spot, and the eldest one of the elder good storytellers would often just linger there, and the youngsters would go there and he just tell random stories, and no doubt he would have heard the same stories from his superiors when he was younger. So this is how like stories get passed down, and they wouldn't have been, and even if they did read it, like for example, I read the Ramayana and it's like 1,200 pages, like heavy reading, and after I'd read it, I got not much out of it because of my but I've got this thing where like if I start a book, I have to finish it even if I'm not like getting anything out of the book, I'm finishing that book. But the Ramayana is about the incarnation of Vishnu is Ram. And Ram is like one of the most revered forms of God in India. And in God Talks with Arjuna, Guruji describes him as a great and noble king of ancient India. And it is said that throughout his reign, no death or disease touched his kingdom. Of righteousness, he possessed divine weapons by which he was conqueror of all evil and enemies. And among wielders of weapons, the greatest, as was Rama, is the vanquisher of one's own inner enemies of delusion, using the bow of calmness. And Ram is often depicted with a bow, with a taut bowstring of a straight spine in meditation, fitted with the unerring arrows of self-control and concentration. So it's all like metaphorical, and Guruji does such a beautiful job of like explaining the what the symbology means of all these lovely images that are used in Hinduism and in Christianity, as the dove of light descending from, for example, so it's really wonderful. But the Mahabharata is an even longer thing. It's heaven, and it's like a amalgamation of like 1,000 different stories. It is insanely long. You struggle to find one like book which has all the books in it, because it's so long. And interestingly, that Mahabharata, the author was Vyas, and if you look at the number of like books, how much content Vyas has like created, Veda Vyas we call him, it's impossible that he could have, that it's just an impossible feat how much literary work he's produced. It's just absolutely insane. Like, you think the Bible is long, this is like nothing compared to like the Mahabharata, for example, and how it's all done with one author. It's just a phenomenal thing.
If humans
Yeah,
have
Chris?
been, if humans have been anything, it's storytellers, throughout the years, and without being able to put pen to paper and have stories on your mobile phone, stories were or information on your mobile phone, stories were the best way to try to compact information in and deliver it, and we can visualize things and store it in memory. So it's a beautiful way of transferring information, isn't it? Something that struck me there, just reading this paragraph over again, Yogananda's mother, if you were her, she's quite young, she's having children, so we're going to cover this in the next subject, so I don't want to go into too much detail in the next episode. But she had been given a lot of information about the coming of Yogananda. So, and maybe Yogananda's significance, that he would have been a significant individual himself. So I wonder if the chastisement and the instruction that she gave to Yogananda and others may have been as a result of feeling a little bit kind of uptight to say, hey, shape up, you're going to be somebody great one day. So that could have had something to do with it, because it could weigh heavily on your mind if you have this great individual, this great soul under your responsibility, and you have to do your best to guide that soul and make sure that they don't err as much as possible. But just a thought.
Yeah, I feel like Guruji was very humble when he described his parents, because they seem very spiritually advanced beings, both of them, maybe even avatars. And the way they raised their children and the way they found their guru, like we'll talk about this later, but it seemed like very magical lives that they were living. And one more comment on the storytelling is like that. It's interesting that Priyank said that this is so common and that everyone hears the same stories, and I'm guessing they were also blending into the culture, right? Like they were like raising their children like other people at that time would have done, right? In upholding the principles as much as they can, the spiritual principles. Yes, Priyank?
Yeah, and the most loved of those stories were always the Krishna ones, because they're the most like miraculous and the most beautiful. And so even now, though, so back then that would have been the case, and even now, Krishna stories are just, they hit the high levels of popularity. But interestingly, that interesting that he's written chastisement and instruction went hand in hand, which is interesting. I can't even imagine that. Like, there's stories where like in the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, there's stories where like people go wrong and they discover they have to experience the consequences of their follies, and so there's those kind of stories. So perhaps that's what she meant by chastisement and then instruction, by taking out like little threads of stories from those scriptures and then making it relevant for the day, perhaps.
Absolutely, I can see that. I mean, if you say one of the books is 1,200 pages and the other one, I don't know how long the Mahabharata is. I'm sure there's plenty of material to choose from in there. Yeah, one thing that I actually, no, I mean, it's not that that recent, but at some point I was always wondering the relationship Mahabharata and Bhagavad Gita, and the Bhagavad Gita is actually just a tiny portion of the Mahabharata, right? Like I always thought this is like a big part of it, but I think it's like of one of the books, a section is the Bhagavad Gita, and still it's that long. Yes, Priyank?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so the Bhagavad Gita is
Yeah.
those verses. They happen. There's a whole battle that's happening, which is the Mahabharata, and between the in that battlefield, one small scene in interaction between Krishna and his disciple Arjuna, and that's the Bhagavad Gita. So that's like not even 1% of the whole story, and the whole story is like a story within a story within a story. It's just like, and it's all interwoven, and to even keep a track of the characters is mind-boggling. But and it's all consistent, yet somehow and this is before writing. This is just oratory scripture. It wasn't like written. So how they would have kept a track of all these, if they did make this up, how they kept track of all this and making it a cohesive thing is just it's mind-blowing.
Yeah, Guruji did say that the saints and sages throughout the ages took care of India, right, and made sure that the scriptures were preserved, and that is probably one of the ways they did it, by keeping the Bhagavad Gita alive and the Mahabharata. With that being said, we can move to the next paragraph, which is when I read that, I was like, wow, that is either very old-fashioned or very Indian, but it's definitely not something that people would do in the West. And it talks about that mother. Do you want to say something before, Priyank?
Yeah, quickly. Lauren put a comment where like is an interesting comment where like he's aware of like how he was taught from a very young age, but how can he remember? Certainly, this is quite an interesting one, because like how far back you may remember like very big things that happened in your life when you were very young, or very momentous emotional states or something. But here he's talking about very specific methods of transmission, isn't he? How his parents were, what their qualities were, which is like quite phenomenal that he's able to remember these things. Obviously, as a realized master, he's got access to information past, present, and future. Perhaps that's how. Lauren?
Yeah, and I think also for me, it was also that he seems very aware of how necessary that chastisement and instruction were. But yeah, I was wondering, as a child, was he aware then? Probably. But yeah, it's just quite interesting, isn't it, that he can fondly recognize that, how necessary it was.
There's this very beautiful word in India called Leela, and to describe how he was aware, yet he went through this life in this way. We in India we would say, that this was Guruji's Leela, which was this is a play. This was a play just to enact the things that were meant to be enacted, so we can have this beautiful autobiography of a yogi, and we can know all the beautiful pastimes of Guruji. So that's how they describe it in an artistic way, how they describe these quite complex things, like remembering what childhood in such detail, for example, and being aware somehow.
Nice. And with that, we can move on to the next paragraph, where they basically talk about when Guruji's dad came home from work, the mother would dress up the children to make them look nice for him. And that is something that I found very interesting. I mean, it shows you on the one hand, like probably how it works in an Indian family. This is probably traditional like that. On the other hand, you also have to say that Guruji's dad was a big shot at work, right? He was someone who worked his way from very humble circumstances into a position of a really nice income. I mean, one of the trade-offs that we just talked about is that he had to move around a lot, but he was an important person. He reached a level of VP, vice president, at Bengal Nagpur Railway, which was one of the large railway companies. I think that I think Nagpur is somewhere in the middle of India, and Kolkata is or Bengal is to the very east. So I'm guessing this was, if you wanted to go from Bengal to Bombay, you would probably have used that railway line and then changed at Nagpur to another one and then go to Bombay. So I'm guessing it was a very important railway line, and it still exists today. So Bengal Nagpur Railway was later merged with another railway company, and is today just known as Eastern Railway, which is the company that part of the Indian Railways that is in charge of the east of India, and it still has its headquarters in Kolkata. I wonder if the headquarters is still the same building as it was back then. That would be interesting. But yeah, Priyank as a railway someone who works in this industry would probably appreciate a career like that. Yeah, and the fact that she dresses up the children for him to come home. Some people would look at this and say, okay, this means this is a very patriarchal society, right? But you could also say it as, imagine you don't have this suppression part of it, but you just do everything out of love and out of virtue. Then you do this to show your husband your respect and in this way. And then I'm guessing this can also be seen as some exchange of affection between the parents. That in that sense, I would say it is very sweet. I'm not sure if any of you guys have any feelings one way or the other about this, but I can see both sides. I think in a regular circumstance, I would say, should I really admire this? But if it's two kind of saintly people doing this to each other, then I feel like it is something very sweet. Yeah, Chris?
I think my thoughts are a little bit potentially controversial on this because and they shouldn't be. But it's very easy to look back in history and judge it with the perspective that we have today. And maybe we can exert meaning on something that maybe was, it's going to be very difficult for us to take our understanding of the world and how things have changed and developed over time and apply it to 100 years ago. Things were simply very different, and yeah, I certainly don't see any malice in it or anything necessarily oppressive about it per se. I think it's quite a beautiful thing, an expression of love. Is as you say, I didn't think too much of it, to be honest, when I read it personally.
Definitely, we have to provide some context in this. Try and see the context, because set of values and feminism and all that kind of stuff is one thing, but you have to appreciate what the time and the culture that was there, and for example the set of circumstances. For this was a time before, for example, Zoom was around. This is the time before you could get very easily from A to B. So, and I know this from experience, when you have senior officials like Guruji's father was, he would bring home people from his office, from meetings, or potentially people would even stay at his house. So then this is then no longer about the affection element. This is about professionalism element, because people then will say, oh, Bhagabati is like this, but his family is like this. so the expectation sometimes has to be met in terms of like the visitors and the people that he's bringing home, because it's certainly not something that we can definitely infer it's not something that he would ask his wife to do, because Guruji says later that he dressed, he clung to one pair of shoes till they were entirely useless. So he's certainly not in the camp where he expects one thing from himself and another thing from his children and his wife. And in the example that we're going to come to later in terms of spending, it's clear that he's very consistent with his approach to his values.
True. I didn't think of it that way, but yeah, he would have probably not insisted on that given his lifestyle. That is very true. And then the next 4 paragraphs, they are kind of connected. They are talking about a kind of, I would say, a heated argument between the parents. Guruji says this only happened once in his life, which is remarkable. And it's very interesting. It started out with his father criticizing his mother about being too charitable. And then it ended up in her saying, okay, I'm going to go to my parents and see you later. Interestingly, one of her brothers coming to mediate between them, and then eventually them making up again. I find it so funny, like this. This is like probably how people did it back then, but you go like, I call a hackney carriage and I'm off. And then after they, I'm guessing Bhagabati apologized, and then it was all forgotten. But it kind of shows an intact emotional life where everyone says what they feel, right? And then it ends in situations like that. So it's not like where people keep their feelings inside and hidden, but it is a very openly spoken kind of relationship that they have. Yes, Priyank?
Certainly. The word I love in this passage is that when she says goodbye, I'm going home to my mother's home, Guruji then describes this as ancient ultimatum, exclamation mark. Now, this is an ancient exclamation, certainly in India, and I've experienced this in my own life and my early marriage as well. My wife, and it was pretty frustrating because my wife her family lived 2 streets away, so this ancient ultimatum was very easy for her to like fulfill, because no hackney carriage was required to be drawn. It was literally later, see you in a few days. No need to like grab belongings. Should keep everything that she needed at her house. So like this happened with us as well. If we'd have an argument, sometimes we'd be like, hey, I'm going to my house now, and I wouldn't see her for a few hours. Thankfully this doesn't happen anymore, but it used to happen back in the day. So like it seems like there's definitely a thing in India, like the relationship between the in-laws, because they usually even now, like when you get married, you go and live with your in-laws, and you'd live with your a woman would live with her husband's family. They wouldn't just be go and buy your own place as it is in the West nowadays. Even with Indians in the West, you'd go and live and integrate yourself in that home and become a child. So it's very, very difficult, and since this old ancient ultimatum, because this is obviously this was like this for thousands of years in India. So this ancient ultimatum is certainly there. But I was wondering if this kind of thing actually also, this logic also applies for Austria, Mike. Perhaps I don't know if it does so much in England, but Mike, perhaps you can enlighten us.
No, not really. Like in Austria, we move out from our parents' place really early and never come back. And I mean, I think it would probably be more similar to England than it would be similar to India in Austria. The in-laws definitely play a big role. I think that happens everywhere, right? Like if you would have an argument with your partner, that would always be the place to go, right? Your parents, especially when you're younger, I guess. So I can relate to that. Yes, Chris?
I see many correlations between the Irish and the Indian peoples. Like there's a lot of correlation there, and this is probably one of them. Because you know, Irish mums are very, I guess they're just very loving, very caring. They've got a lot of these qualities that maybe typical Indian mothers might have.
Careful,
Very,
be careful, Chris. She's probably listening.
very,
Getting all
very,
the ammo.
yeah, but very much involved, and I think any daughter of a mother, and you know, speaking as a son, has a very loving mother. You do want to go back to that warm, loving, caring embrace, right? You know, this manifestation of the mother, divine mother. Sorry. So it's very alluring, isn't it? Always, but for sure in the Irish culture, it's strongly there as well. And in Brazil, for sure as well. I've got a Brazilian wife, so it's there here as well. It's universal.
You've taken, Chris. You've done this thing called we call it a garjamai, which is like
sticking my foot in it or something. Is it?
No. It means like you know how we said like the girl usually enters and the woman enters the husband's home and makes themselves a part of that home. You've done the inverse, so you've become the man who's integrated himself in the. So like the polarities of an east and west are very visible in your life apparently, and compared to young Mukunda's life. And I joke, but the other line, the next line was pretty cool. We broke into astounded lamentations. And you can just imagine this, and I can certainly remember this. I remember like whenever my mum would cry or get upset because, you know, in my family we had some certain issues, we would go wild. You know, that's children, we'd get so upset we'd just literally cry with our mothers. So these astounded, you know, this astounded lamentations, I like completely know exactly what he's talking about. And also the maternal uncle. I remember because I'm also a maternal uncle for my sisters who've got children, so I've played this this maternal uncle character, and I must say it's easy. It's a very natural role for a maternal uncle to play, and to be the mediator between these two warring parents sometimes.
You did a good job at it as well, didn't you?
Yeah.
It makes sense. One of the things that I want to comment on that you said earlier, Priyank. Imagine, like, I didn't think of it that way, but by that logic, when Guruji was born, his grandmother must have lived with him as well. Isn't that right? Would she not have lived? I mean, that is one comment I wanted to make, and the other one is that Bhagabati was a stronger than usual husband, probably because of the fact that his dad has passed away and that he has been head of the household for decades already at this point, right? Where he would not have had to compromise on anything. He was like really the strongest person in this household. The Iron Fist. Absolutely. Then one comment that Lauren made was very interesting, that this happened even though they were so advanced, right? Which is super interesting. So oftentimes when saints play roles like this, then I often think they just do it to show us how to do it in the right way, right? Yeah, Lauren?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. And I think it sets that example of Well, here's the relatability. You know, we do it too. And I feel like it gives us that extra impetus to be like, oh, it's okay. Like we can still progress along this path and want to leave our husband's home in a state of rage.
Because if you also think about the maternal uncle actually having time to come, that must mean like she was like packing and like annoyed like in the house. Like you can imagine the tension in the household, like arguments happening, and Bhagabati sending like one of the boys to like go get your uncle. Only he could save us from this.
It's so relatable though. I feel I've done it myself, packed a bag, ready to go back to my parents. Like, you know, I feel like Chris said, it's universal. I feel like many of us have been there.
That's why you were laughing so much when I was telling the story.
Yeah.
And one other clue that he gives us is, like Priyanka mentioned earlier, he called it the ancient ultimatum that she gave the husband. And then the counsel that was given by the brother-in-law was garnered, no doubt, from the ages. So it was basically something that happens over and over and over again. And they kind of played that kind of thing as well, which is, like we said earlier, something that saints just also do because they play that role and they just want to be an example. And then Guruji even writes about it. That's in my opinion the reason why he mentions this in the Autobiography of a Yogi, to show how saintly people handle those kind of situations.
Yeah, uncles play a like really important role in the Mahabharata. Uncles and relatives and like desires of like parents for their children and stuff. So like this definitely would have been something potentially from the Mahabharata and other scriptures such as those.
And we will talk about this in the next episode, but their guru, their soon-to-be guru, Lahiri Mahasaya, was a man, I suppose a man of a family as well, right? You know, he was quite a special guru in that sense, that he was able to show, hey guys, you know, you can do this, you can play this role as a family man, let's say, and be saintly and seek God, and you can have the time to do both. I think that's probably the biggest lesson there for many people, is like, you know, you can have the time. So here you have two people coming together that were initiated into create at some point. Sorry not to go into too much, but they went through the challenges of a marriage, which like you said, there's so many lessons there for everybody on that path, and going down the path of Kriya Yoga as well.
Absolutely. The next 4 paragraphs, they are also connected, and they talk about charity. And the mother was a very charitable person, and the father, as we know already, he was, I would call him more someone who was trying to be very responsible with money. I wouldn't call him like a penny pitcher, but he's like somebody who really cares about how money is spent. And again, Guruji kind of explains to us how they would argue about this subject. So the mother wants to give 10 rupees to somebody, and the dad then recounts a story where he as a kid wanted to get 1 rupee as like support from someone who was more wealthy, and that one person denied it to him, saying that every rupee is important, every single rupee. And the mother replies in a very psychological, intelligent way. She doesn't like tell him he's wrong, but she kind of says, yeah, and see, this story is burned in your brain because it was so painful, and you want to pass that same pain on to another person, which is perfect logic. And he then immediately agrees and even says, give her the money with my goodwill, right? So he doesn't say it like, okay, there you go, or something, but he's like
no grudges.
No, yes, exactly. Which is very healthy. So they have this argument. They both put up their arguments, and then he sees her logic and it gives in and says, "This is how it should be." So it's a very efficient exchange, and very healthy, in my opinion. Which is like, I don't know, you don't always see that in marriages, but I guess this is how it should be. So it shouldn't be that you, like, oftentimes you have like two partners and one partner isn't fully expressing themselves because they feel like, oh, I don't want to start a fight or something, but they are both fearless. They both put out their sides of the story, and then they come to a conclusion also swiftly, which is fantastic. When, I guess that's what happens when you have two saintly people married to each other. The whole subject. Oh yeah, Priyank.
Yeah, I find it interesting that that this the mother, Gyana Prabha Ghosh, is able to use logic to counter logic. The mind of the you know, of the father, because of Bhagabati, because he was obviously he's principally, or he was very expert in logic and no doubt arguments and stuff, and making the case, especially financial cases, i.e. this 1 10 why 10 1 is enough, which is probably true. You know, we don't give our entire wealth away, which is what happens later on. We'll discuss that. But she's able to counter logic, so she was able to tune into that capability, which was pretty impressive, and also use the psychology element of it, as you mentioned, Mike, which is really really shows how elevated she must have been intellectually. Actually, she's not just a queen of hearts. She's actually quite a lot more than that.
Yes, and the feeling that I get from her is also not that she's donating money in a high society kind of way to gain recognition, but that she's actually on the street, meeting needy people, finding their need genuine, and then trying to alleviate their needs, which is the saintly way of giving. And I found a section in God Talks with Arjuna that talks about how to give gifts, and this is of course it's the Bhagavad Gita, so it's actually a very long section, and I just picked one paragraph out of there, and I just want to read it quickly. And it says, the good or sattvic gift is one made for the sake of righteousness, without expectation of anything in return, and is bestowed in proper time and place on a deserving person. That gift is deemed rajasic, fostering worldly consciousness, which is offered with reluctance or in the thought of receiving a return or of gaining merit. A tamasic or degrading gift is one bestowed at a wrong time and place on an unworthy person, contemptuously or without goodwill. So in that sense, I would say she was really aiming to make sattvic gifts, right? So to giving it to people who probably cannot repay you. I'm imagining she wasn't then going out and bragging about how charitable she is. Like I saw no mention of that. And she was trying to find people who are in a real need. And it says here without goodwill. So that might be one reason why Bhagabati says, give it to her with my goodwill, right? To not degrade his own giving. And then there's a section in the Second Coming of Christ where they also talk about the way of how to handle when you give, and about communicating it, and how saintly it is to be a silent giver. It's also just one paragraph that I'm going to read. And it goes, It is the silent giver presenting gifts to his brethren in secret who receives the heavenly reward of feeling God's omnipresence in other hearts. Anyone who gives alms or words of wisdom to another and brags about it destroys the sanctity of his charitable act. To boast, I gave, or I helped to redeem, is not sanctity, but sanctimony. A person who broadcasts his piety may receive material reward by gaining some indiscriminate admirers and some followers, but glorifying oneself will keep away wise friends and the all-wise God. The heavenly law does not give the reward of revelation to braggarts. The prating ego hears nothing of truth. Which is, I feel like both of those principles are something that Guruji's mother was abiding by. And in this way, giving sattvic gifts to their brothers or to the people that they meet on the street. Yes, Priyank?
Yeah, I like how consistent the God talks with Arjuna and the second coming of Christ is, and especially in the two passages that you read. And obviously this is in keeping with Guruji's interpretations of the core, the essential spirituality, cohesiveness between the East and the West. So really good examples. I like that, Mike. The one thing I wanted to just ask about this section was, do you think that she would have given to every single person that she encountered that asked her for money or begged? Because no doubt, you know, they're obviously quite wealthy, this family, and you can they would have encountered a lot of beggars, no doubt, and she would obviously handle her own money as well. Sorry, she would also have access to cash, and she would, I can imagine if she's approached by anyone, I can imagine her just giving what she could at that given point in time, and not just like walking past as you have to. Well, I often do in London, because you get approached so often. There's not enough, you can't hold enough cash, especially if you're working in the city. But that could be a flaw in my charitable attitude. But in this case, obviously, I think she obviously didn't have the cash on her and hence went to Bhagabati. Yeah, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Chris.
It's a real difficult one, isn't it? That the teaching from Jesus is like, you know, teach a man to fish, that kind of thing. I think that's ingrained in many of us. That being in London for 8 years as well, there's a big drug problem amongst many homeless people. So I often, Frank, you know, would have walked past homeless people who would maybe have been on drugs, and you're thinking, okay, well, I can't facilitate this. So I think you should use your power of discrimination there to rightly give by what it seems that Yogananda's mother did do there. That she wasn't just going around, you know, maybe giving to anybody that maybe she saw. That it was probably, as Mike highlighted quite correctly, that she was doing this quite consciously and in a sattvic manner. So I think, yes, there's grades of that, isn't there? But unfortunately, it's not all charity would be put to good use, essentially.
Yeah, I think this is an important point. I find one difficulty with giving to people on the street these days is the vehicle of how to give it to them. Like, I'm a person who I don't use cash for nothing, and now I more recently I started going to the ATM every now and then just to get money out to give it away. Unfortunately, in the US, the ATMs, they always just give you $20 bills all the time. I wish that it would break it down a bit more. And I do feel like if you talk to somebody and you ask them how they're doing and then you give them a few dollars, I think this this is usually the way to do it. If you feel like they're probably just using it for something that is bad for them, then maybe not. But in general, here in Los Angeles, there's a lot of homeless everywhere. So it is very hard not to feel for them and not to try to give them something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, charity. I think this is like something that has become more and more important during the course of our lives. I feel like maybe 20, 30 years ago, you wouldn't have seen so much poverty, but I feel like these days it's really hard not to see it on the street. So I can only imagine how it was for Guruji's mother. And I'm also not sure how the mentality is in India. If maybe this is, if you are wealthy in India, it's probably expected of you to give some, but I'm really not sure of if charity is being seen as something that needs to be done by people who are rich or not so much. I know in Europe there is always this thing, we have like more of a social safety net, definitely more than in the US or in other countries. And that's why some people say, oh, I don't have to give. We have a social safety net. They can just go there. And yeah, this is definitely something that people think of before they give.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go to the next two paragraphs. And they talk about Bhagabati. It's a bit of continuation, but in a different way. So it's basically the principle. So Bhagabati has this habit of whenever somebody comes up to him with any proposal, especially when it costs money, to say no. And that doesn't mean that he will say no forever, but he didn't want to make rash decisions on anything. He wanted to give everything, as Guruji calls it, due reflection. So he wants to think about it. He is a highly evolved spiritual being as well, so he will probably use his intuition as well. So he needs some time to like think about this. Is this a good idea? And then next time, if it comes around a second time, then he knows already how he feels about it. The examples that Guruji gave here, they were not like just like buying a lollipop or something, but they're like big things like a vacation trip or a new motorcycle, which is like really costly items. I can imagine, especially in those days in India. Priya?
Yeah, the motorcycle reference is the only one actually that he does in the book, but he did buy a motorcycle. Guruji did. That he need, because in Mejda he says that whilst in 1911, whilst Guruji was at Scottish Church College and going to Calcutta and Serampore to see Sri Yukteswar, it would be a long time. So the Sri Yukteswar was like, why don't you get a bike and come to me flying like a bird, you can come. And then he went and asked his father, and then his father was replied, the conditions of my early life are not unknown to you. I have told you how poor our family was. And through unending patience and ceaseless perseverance, I've established some financial security for our family. And Mejda replied, but your sons do not have a poor father. And then his father then capitulated, and then he got this motorbike, and then they used to ride it around. And there's a lovely picture of Sri Yukteswar, I think, right in the bike as well. So yeah, that's the only reference to the motorbike, but it's a very nice story in Mejda.
I think Guruji learned logic from his mother, how to win father over.
I was thinking that, yeah. Out-logician him.
Yeah.
The only way.
Yeah, and one thing that Bhagabati also did, he lived a very frugal life for himself. So he himself would not buy a motorcycle or a car, even when his sons already had them. And he would also, his idea of quality time was spending it alone in spiritual practices, which is also different, I guess, especially when you are young. I guess his children, they had other ideas. So he was not only initially always trying to withhold spending. He was also setting an example of how to live a life that is not based on material pleasure, but a life that is based on spirituality for his children. And I think this is also like something that you have to do when you are a parent. You cannot preach one thing and act in another way, right? You have to be consistent. You have to expect things from your children that you would also expect from yourself. Yes, Priyank?
Do you think we have to live frugally?
Yeah. I think that plain living and high thinking is one of the principles that Guruji mentions often. I mean, frugal means something different today than it used to 100 years ago, I guess. But I do think unnecessary luxuries are probably not something beneficial for our lives. So we should really think about what we spend our money on. Interestingly enough, we just had a young adults session about habits, and brother was telling us that if we do anything consciously, we have to be very careful what we do, because if we like it, then we will always remember that we liked it. And then this memory will make us do it again, and it will turn into a habit. And he made a lot of funny Lord of the Rings references, and he called habits hobbits, and it was very funny. But that's kind of this is kind of something we need to be aware of. If we start spending money on certain things, they might come back to us and say, "Hey, I want to do this again. This was so much fun." Yes, Lauren?
I also think it depends on how attached we are, if at all. You know, there could be someone who has all the riches and gold in the entire world, but not have the attachment to it at all. And maybe that's the crux. It's like, yeah, you could be sitting on a golden throne, but as long as all you care about is God, then you've won the lottery, so to speak. Yeah, Priyank?
Also, you're also toying with fire as well. when you say you're not like it's really easy to say you're not like attached to it, or that you don't need it, but then just like surrounding yourself with it. So it's a really difficult balancing act, isn't it? But Mike, I was interested to note that you're still attending young adults meetings, wondering when you'd be graduating from that. Thought you already had graduated.
No comment. No,
I'm nearly
not going
there.
to give away my age here, but let's say there's an expiration date.
And it passed 3 years ago.
No, but it will come around soon, I guess.
You know, in the young adult.
Let's change subject, Priyank. Let's talk about something.
Very quickly though, in the young adult Sangha, we I think initially, Mike, we were in London, we did 18 to 35, and then we made it like 18 to 40, and then like it's going to carry on going up. Lauren, you're going to have to stop us from ever increasing these.
Disciplinarian hand will come down.
Yes, I'm good. So I will 40 soon. So my life as a young adult is has an expiration date on it. So I'm enjoying it while it lasts. Yeah, absolutely. The example of Bhagabati, he reminds me a lot of my dad. And also that is something that my dad often did, say no initially, and then he would quote the Autobiography of a Yogi. That's one reason why I always remember that.
You have
Father always to say no.
You out-logician him though, because then you have to remember what his mum used to say, and then what Guruji said to his dad as well.
Yeah, and we did sometimes. Yeah. So, but I have people who know me well. They know I have some. Patience is not one of my virtues sometimes, and that's especially as a kid. So I got frustrated. I was like, why not? Yeah, but that's all right. That's kind of everyone gets the kind of training that they need to in life to be successful later on, right? So that's how Guruji does it. And the next 4 episodes, they also talk about Bhagabati, and they're also connected, and they talk about how he's an extraordinarily hard worker, an exceptional employee, and he makes a very good salary, and he's very successful at the things he does. Yet he doesn't really focus on the material gains that he makes. So this is not his goal. His goal, he does it out of virtue, to be a hard worker, to be reliable, to do public service. So one thing that I found remarkable was that he organized a bank. Like, maybe that was something that is more common back in the day, but I've never heard of anyone organizing a bank. But it sounds pretty intricate. And then he refused to benefit from the creation of this bank later on. And the other example that was given is that there was someone like a controller or somebody coming into Bengal Nagpur Railway and checking on the work that Bhagabati did. And like other people, they would maybe think, oh no, he's gonna tell me that I took too much money out or something. But for him, it was the opposite. He was actually given back compensation of 125,000 rupees, which was at the time $41,000. I did not put this into the inflation calculator, but I'm sure this is a big amount of money. Yeah. And later on, he never even mentioned it to his family. And when the youngest brother asked him about it, because he saw it on the bank statement, he told him that this is not his goal to make a lot of money. So it is not something for him worth mentioning. Instead, his real goal are spiritual goals. And on that subject, I saw a section in Man's Eternal Quest where Guruji talks about this, focusing on God and not focusing on becoming a millionaire in this incarnation. Chris, do you want to read the first paragraph?
Sure. I just did a quick calculation. Apparently, it's nearly 1.5
Oh, you
million
did?
dollars in today's
1.5 million? Okay.
Well, roughly, yeah. I didn't get the exact year right, but that's quite a lot, which is topical, given what we're about to talk about here, which is to try to be a millionaire in this incarnation is really much more difficult than to be a true son of God. Earthly environment is so limited that many people die without having become what they want to be. But to know God is possible in one lifetime because you don't have to acquire him. He is already your own. Mm-hmm. Now, you could argue here's Bhagabati achieving both in one lifetime. So, yeah, great.
But it's remarkable, right? How he says that it's so difficult to become a millionaire because the likelihood that you won't be, especially in this world where the vast majority of people aren't, right? So it is very, and then if you put the same amount of effort into self-realization, how far you can get. So it's very encouraging.
I suppose a millionaire, whenever this was written, is going to be significantly more than today's money. It should be noted. So in case you're thinking that, well, I'm already a millionaire. Why am I not tuned to God? Well, maybe calculation should be adjusted. But it is a beautiful, inspiring comment, isn't it? To prioritize your life in a way that Bhagabati here is saying as well.
Lauren, do you want to continue reading?
Yes. Even if everyone were to pray day and night to become as rich as Henry Ford, their prayers could not be granted, because earth is not a place where everyone can be a Henry Ford, but everyone can be rich in spirit, for God has given everyone equal power to become like him. When you claim your divinity, everything belongs to you. A Henry Ford might lose his wealth or his health, but a Jesus Christ can create health or wealth or anything else he wants at will. So don't long to be as rich or as healthy as someone else. Have only one desire, to be like God. Jesus never claimed that he was the only Son of God. The Father loves you, his child, just as much as he loves Jesus. And God won't deny you anything if, like Jesus, you establish your true status with him. Meditation is the way to reclaim your lost divinity.
There's so many little bits that you can take from that, isn't there? You just
yeah.
break that whole thing down. Every sentence is like
Mm.
something to delve into. But the one thing I took from that is that he specifically said that Earth is not a place where everybody can be like Henry Ford. Wonder where else he's referring to. Not necessarily other planets, astral planets. I'm thinking of one in particular. Quite controversial in some people's eyes about Jesus not claiming that he's the only son of God as well. You need to be careful who you say that in front of. But beautiful, really awesome bit from Man's Eternal Quest, Volume 1. Beautiful.
Yeah, and it comes to show that, so you put all this effort into becoming a millionaire, and against all odds, you achieve it, and then you cannot exchange your million for spiritual millions, right? So it's basically in your next life, you won't have the millions anymore, and if you would have made all this spiritual progress, you could have taken it with you, but the millions you cannot. Yes, Chris?
What was it Jesus said? That it was as easy to get a rich man into heaven as it is to get a camel through the eye of a needle. Is that it?
Yeah.
Something like that. Which is, yeah, a little bit
Sorry, Bill Gates.
Quite, sorry?
Sorry, Bill Gates. Sorry, Elon Musk.
Yeah, I don't think it's a literal thing, is it? But it's certainly
No, let's
those
make
who
it literal. Sorry,
prioritize it. Let's just be clear, because he knows somebody listening might take it literal.
Fair enough. Slap on my wrist.
Yeah. That might be one of the reasons why very wealthy people become charitable when they're older, because they notice that their life will end at some point and their money won't come with them, or at least they don't know what will happen. So if you have any kind of belief in a higher being or in karma, then what you should do is try to give your money, spend it as charitable as possible, right?
There's this big push for billionaires to like give away all their wealth now. They're pledged to give away their wealth at the point of departure. But even if they give away 99%, it'll still be like their family will still be billionaires. It's crazy. If not, at least hundreds of millionaires.
Yeah,
Wow.
there's data showing that over a certain amount of money, your happiness just it levels off. Right, you don't get necessarily more happy. But there is another lesson in this, maybe, that through desire for money, you become attached to it. We've talked about that earlier in the podcast. And it is quite sad to see people that maybe save all their life, in seeking money, and then they become attached to it and become obsessed with it, and that then becomes this all-consuming and destroying thing, which should be the thing to set you free, but actually it becomes the thing that you become more enamored with, and yeah, it's a very much a double-edged sword if not handled correctly. And I've seen that before personally. It's quite something.
Yeah, I love how Bhagabati is so humble, where the quote Priyank mentioned earlier, that he says that he had to work so hard for his family to have some money. even though he settled them very nicely. He would, I mean, by today's standards, he would probably be a millionaire, right? And that is kind of what you want, right? You want to be comfortable, and then everything beyond that, you just want to be doing charity, because nothing else makes any sense in this world, because you can't take the money with you, and there's really not, otherwise the money is just sitting there doing nothing. Yeah, Chris?
Yeah, I think maybe it's simply to be, the way I think about it is to be a channel for God. That if, should you require X fund to do Y, then, you know, fine, like let that be the case. And I always mess up the name, so I'm trying to think of it. Is it Rajasrani?
Rajarsi Janakananda.
Rajarsi Janakananda, very wealthy individual, and played a really important part in the SRF's history. So it's maybe, and he was sort of bewildered by the lack of spiritual joy and things like that he had, even with all the money that probably drove him towards seeking more wealth in the form of spirituality through SRF. But definitely very wealthy individual, and played an extremely important part in the SRF's current standings in history. So yeah, maybe more act as a channel, as we are all placed in different parts of the world, and hopefully bringing some light to it.
We did an
Absolutely.
episode dedicated to him, didn't we, in our previous series?
We did. Priyank, was there a Gita chapter that you wanted to go over still?
Yes, there is, yes. So the last paragraph was, why be elated by material profit? Father replied, the one who pursues a goal of even-mindedness is neither jubilant with gain nor depressed by loss. He knows that man arrives penniless in this world and departs without a single rupee, which is really profound, and in it is the essence of the Gita, very beautifully expressed here. Like the verse that I'm thinking of is chapter 12, verses 13 and 14, where similar stuff is discussed, but much broader scope. So this verse says, for example, he who is free from hatred towards all creatures, is friendly and kind to all, is devoid of the consciousness of I-ness and possessiveness, is even-minded in suffering and joy, forgiving, ever contented, a regular yoga practitioner, etc., etc. So it's like he's literally, there's another case where like you'd hear stories of you know, from the Gita, you just hear one like moral, and then you'd apply it to your whole life, and you can apply it beautifully. And this is one example where you can just quote it just without even thinking. You know, Krishna said, even-mindedness. You know, there's no such thing as gain and loss. It's all, it's never yours to gain or to lose. It's just a beautiful use of scripture, I think, and one that's we can all do actually if we just familiarize ourselves with Guruji's writings and, you know, and his work on the scriptures.
Absolutely. And I think this covers 9 more paragraphs that we went through today. So it's actually a bit more because we added a few together. And in the next episode, we will go to the 3rd part of chapter 1, and we split chapter 1 into 6 parts. So we haven't even reached half of it yet. So there's plenty more to go, and I hope you stay tuned for the 3rd part of chapter 1 next time. Priyank, you have more comments?
The part 3, we're going to discuss Guruji's bit more about Guruji's parents and that their miraculous meeting with their Guruji, which was our Param Guru, which is Lahiri Mahashaya. So which is action-packed minutes there, verses there.
Exactly. So stay tuned for next episode, and thank you all for listening. Jai Guru.
Jai Guru.
Take care.